Hey everyone, welcome to the AMATIC 2020 webinar series. My name is Pat Riley from Hopkinsville, Kentucky. I'm the webinar coordinator. Our webinar today is by Jim Rosnowski, former AMATIC president. Give your class a global perspective. And I'll just say that I kind of urged Jim to do this as a webinar. I saw a mini session that he did on this at AMATIC and thought it would make a great webinar. A lot of good ideas in a short time frame. So I'm looking forward to this. This is sponsored by the International Mathematics ANET and the Math Intensive Committee. The views expressed by the presenter are not necessarily the views of AMATIC, and any commercial products are not endorsed by AMATIC. McGraw-Hill is the sponsor for the 2020 AMATIC webinar series. And I will stop sharing my slides. Jim, if you would go ahead and share yours, and the floor is yours.
Do we have it?
No, not yet. Okay, the share and then select the...
I thought I did that.
Here it comes. Okay, so we've got your whole desktop, so...
And now you have the PowerPoint.
Now we have it, okay.
Okay. Hi, as Pat said, I'm Jim Rosnowski. I teach or taught at Delta College in Michigan. We're about 90 miles north of Detroit. And I've been AMATIC president, but I've also been website coordinator, editor of the journal, a bunch of other things, Midwest VP. The session today is Give Your Classes a Global Perspective. I think Pat sent you a handout. There's a long version and a short version. I'm not sure what you ended up with. I think you got the short version.
Yeah, I tried sending both of them out. The long one with the long version bounced back, so those that had registered before, like the last half hour, should have got an email with the short version. And
okay,
while I'm talking, just
so the long version has all the activities as PDF files, and I also have them as Word files. So if we can't send them to you directly, you can contact me, and I can give you access to the Dropbox folder that has all the handouts in them. I'll be describing the activities as we go through the webinar, but there's a description on the fourth page of the thing that Pat sent you. Okay. All right, so let's get started. Global learning. The AMATIC Network on International Math has a position statement that's in the process of review and hopefully approval. And these are some of the items that they stress in that position statement. It's been through a number of levels of review, and it should be voted on at the Delegate Assembly in Spokane in November. But what we're looking at is trying to give students a global learning, which would involve things with collaborative learning, diversity, and making them more aware of what's going on in the world. Now, what I'm proposing is that we don't have to add new material to the course, but we can take what we are doing now and modifying it a little bit. For example, one activity that I have found in every trig book that I've ever used has been to find the distance between two cities that have the same longitudinal line. And typically students do that and have no interest beyond the numbers involved in the problem. But what I've done is I've added a little twist to it. So here are three cities: Accra, Zaragoza, and Peterborough. Now they're all on the same longitudinal line, but in addition to having the distances, I ask the students to let me know what country these are in, and I give them a map and I ask them to locate the cities on the map. So check your geography. Did you know that we're talking about Ghana, Spain, and England? And there they are. It also reinforces the whole idea of the longitudinal line, everything lining up on one spot. Now, your textbook probably gives you a couple names, couple cities to work with, but you can really customize it for your students, give every student a different set. If you go to the website Batchgeo, and in the resource page, there's a link, you can get a list of cities that share a common line, or longitudinal line. You go to the page, and towards the bottom, there'll be a pull-down menu that says near latitude. Switch that to near longitude. Then select the part of the world that you're interested in, color-coded, and then click on View Cities by Longitude and Latitude. And it will give you a list of cities that share a specific longitude. And then you can pick out the ones you want, customize an assignment, and go from there. Now, if you want, Wikipedia also has that in there. Now, you can't Google it from Google, but if you go into Wikipedia and in the search box type something like 50th meridian east, Wikipedia will give you a list of cities that line up at the 50th meridian east. Or you can say, 45th meridian west, or whatever you want. And that's another way of getting those. Now, one of the first activities that I developed on my own, not from a textbook, dealt with the Barcelona Olympics in 1992. It dealt with how they lit the torch. The whole idea was that there was an archer who fired a flaming arrow over the torch, and it ignited the gas. So the activity that I had, this is activity number 2, gives you the height of the archer, the angle of the shot, the initial velocity of it, and they're asked to find the equation of the path of the arrow, the parabolic path that would go over the torch. He was aiming for 5 feet over the torch. The arrow went over the torch and ended up in a sand bin outside of the stadium. So they were asked to find the equation of the path and then determine the height of the torch. Now, students could stop right there. They wouldn't need to know where Barcelona was. They wouldn't need to know anything else. They could do the problem. But to add a twist to it, what I did is I gave them a video, a YouTube video of the whole torch lighting ceremony. And at the end of the video, you get a lady in white. So I asked them for 5 extra points on the assignment to tell me who she was. Well, that meant they would have to figure out that Barcelona was in Spain, that Spain had a monarchy, and this was the Queen of Spain. Now, I expected that. I expected them to come up with Queen of Spain, period. But I was amazed at how many students went to Wikipedia and got her entire bio. So I know everything about this woman, more than I ever wanted to. But it gave the students an opportunity to learn more than just the math behind the assignment. A little bit closer to home, we can look at the National Mall in Washington, D.C. Now, the next few activities are from a presentation I gave when AMATIC was in Washington back in 2008. And I did some research at the Library of Congress, and they have a lot of resources, all copyright free, that tell you about the monuments in Washington, D.C. The resources page has a link to that. And if you go to that link and type in something like White House, you can get photos of the White House and actual scale drawings of different rooms in the White House. On the resource page, I tell you what slides or images to look for those drawings. But for example, here's one of the National Mall, and that's the way it looks currently. This was the original plan. It was drawn up in 1791, and Pierre Lafont sketched it, and he specified 3 things in the plan. First, Capitol, which is Congress's house, and that was on the highest hill in the area. Then he found the White House, a spot for that. And then you go directly west of the Capitol, directly south of the White House, and you get that little circle. That was the 3rd thing that he had in his plan, and that was a monument for Washington. And those were the 3 things that were the main points of the plan. Now, if you look at the current layout of the National Mall, it didn't turn out that way. If you go directly south of the White House, you just miss the Washington Monument a little bit. Well, the problem was when they designed the Washington Monument, the sound wasn't, or the soil wasn't sound enough to build the monument. So what you see today is this block of concrete on the spot that was supposed to be the site of the Washington Monument. It's called the Jefferson Pier or the Jefferson Stone. The third activity asked the students to find the longitude and latitude of the White House and the Capitol, figure out the longitude and latitude of the stone, get the distances between the White House and the stone and the Capitol. It tells them how much the Washington Monument was moved, and then it asks to find the distance between the current Washington Monument and the White House and the Capitol. So it's basically a trig problem, little loss cosines, and then some right triangle trigonometry. If we stick with the Washington Monument, this is the original plan for the Washington Monument. It started construction in 1848, but by 1854, the society that was funding it ran out of money. That's what it looks like now. This is what it looked like in 1854. And it remained that way throughout the Civil War period. And it was only after the Civil War, when funding was covered by the government in 1876, that construction started again. Now, if you've been to the monument, you might notice a change in the white of the stone, and that's why, because construction was halted for so long. Activity number 4 asked the students to come up with the linear equations for the sides of the monument. There's a drawing that shows them what level of construction was reached at different time periods, and it asks them to find the percent of volume of the finished monument that was done in each of the time periods. If we stay in Washington, you've got the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. It's made of black granite, dedicated in 1982. Activity number 5 deals with law of cosines. It gives them the lengths of the two sides of the monument, the angle in between, simple law of cosine problems to find the distance between the two endpoints. Now, if you want to do more with this, the Library of Congress resources, if you type in Vietnam Veterans Memorial, will give you scale drawings of every panel of the monument. So if you want to do something with volume or area, all of that would be available for you. Sticking with the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, you can look at its current location. And it was put there not by accident. It was actually positioned in that spot for one purpose. The way it's positioned, one wing will point to the northeast corner of the Washington Monument, and the other points to the northwest corner of the Washington Monument, Lincoln Memorial, Washington Monument. So activity number 6 asks students to find the distance between the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Monument. You start by finding the distance between the two corners, and then right triangle trigonometry to get to the distance between the two monuments. Ellipses. Well, there is an ellipse. The ellipse in Washington is the area outside of the White House, between the White House and the Washington Monument. It's got the national Christmas tree there. Other events happen there. The resources will have a handout created by a high school teacher who did a study of the ellipse, and it really is an ellipse. So activity number 7 says, okay, if this is an ellipse, here's the length of the major axis, here's the length of the minor axis, find the equation of the ellipse, and then find the circumference and the area. So if you're teaching a calc class, you could do something like that. All right, now those are the activities that I had back in 2008, but let's go international now. Now, when I go through a lot of these, I might be referring to something called the handbook, or this is the resource that I really found a lot of information in. It's all given to you on the resources page, but if I go through something and I say, well, this was in hand, this is the book that I'm referring to. Okay, the ellipse. Well, the ellipse is actually an ellipse, but are all ovals ellipses? So this is a picture of St. Peter's Square in Rome, in the Vatican. You also have the Colosseum in Rome. They are not ellipses. They are ovals based on arcs of 4 circles, and that's referred to as quadracs. Now, a mathematician, Sebastiano Serlio, published his study of creating the construction of these ovals in the mid-1500s. The resources page has a link to a summary of what he did. But basically, he has 4 different constructions for ovals. Construction number 1 and construction number 4 are based on equilateral triangles. Constructions 2 and 3 are based on isosceles triangles. The concept is the same. You start with the 2 triangles, and then you extend the lengths of the sides. In construction 1, it's sort of an arbitrary distance. In constructions 2, 3, and 4, the extension is based on some geometric constraint. Circles in 2 and 4, the squares in number 3. If you go to Google and just search Serlio oval, you'll find a graphic that actually compares the 4 different constructions and shows you the differences in the finalized shape of the oval based on the construction that you use. But the whole idea to create the 4 arcs is to use a triangle with these extensions. Now, I'm using the version that Hand has in his book, but it's basically a summary of the other 4 constructions. So I'm going to start with 2 isosceles triangles, and then I'm going to extend the sides by an arbitrary distance. Right? So now, from point number 1 as the center of your circle, draw arc AD. Then go to point number 4 to create arc A to B. And then to complete it, go to number 3 to create BC, and then number 2 to create the arc from C to D. And you end up with the oval. Now, activity 8 is one that I used in my calc classes. So I had them do the construction, and then I had them use derivatives to show that it's actually a smooth curve at point A. Now, obviously it is, because we're talking about circles, tangents are perpendicular to the radius, and at point A, the 2 arcs are from circles that have a common radius. So yeah, it's going to be smooth. But I had them do the equations of the arcs, did the derivatives at point A to verify that the curve is smooth. Now, if you're not teaching calc, you could always do circumference of the oval, basically 4 arcs. You could do area, a little bit more complicated. If you're introducing functions, you could give everybody in class the same 2 triangles and then have them pick an arbitrary distance to extend the sides. And then see if you can develop a function with that extension connected to the circumference of the oval that you end up with, and see what comes out of that. Another monument or structure in Italy is the Duomo, the cathedral in Florence. Now, there's a great history about the engineering done in Brunelleschi's Duomo, the dome itself. They built the church, and basically they weren't sure how they were going to construct the dome. It was completed in 1436. I like it because most of the domes that I run into are circular, and this one is an octagon. So I used it as a calculus activity. Now, in my research, things I found out, there is a great National Geographic insert from their magazine from February of 2014 that does a lot of stuff with this dome. And it talks about its construction, its dimensions, all of that stuff. Well, it turns out that the construction wasn't very precise. So instead of having a common center, when you do the diagonals of the octagon, the diagonals intersect at actually 4 different points. But I simplified it, and what I did is had them find the volume of the interior of the dome by slicing. So it's basically a calc problem. Cross sections are octagons. So they had to figure out how to find the area of an octagon as your slice. Then you have to worry about what is going to constrain the size of the octagon as it moves up into the dome. And when I first did the problem, all I could find out was that the interior of the dome was an elongated circle, whatever that meant. So the first time I did the activity with my students, I just created an equation of an ellipse that sort of fit the dimensions of the dome and went with that, and it worked fine. But later research says that the arcs or the shape of the dome is something called a Gothic fifth that I had never heard of. But it's in Han, and it's also in the National Geographic handout. What you do is you take the length, divide it up into fifths, use the center as a point 1/5 from one side with a radius of 4/5 of that distance, and create an arc of a circle. And then reverse it for the other side. So the activity that you have or will get has that. It asks the students to come up with that equation based on the dimensions of the dome and to come up with that equation for that arc. Now, if you look at the picture or you look at the drawing, the dome does not close at the top. There is an opening at the top. When I first did the activity, I just said, hey, go to the top of the ellipse. But in the new one, I tell them the size of that opening at the top. So with that, they can determine the correct bound of integration from that opening. Domes are great. Here's another one. This is the Pantheon in Rome. If you look from the outside, it's just this big concrete building. It's not all that impressive. The inside, though, is quite amazing. That is an unsupported dome. It is nothing but a concrete shell spanning this distance. Now, things I've read about it, people make a big deal that there are 28 sections. There are 28 coffers in each row of the circle. There are 28 columns because 28 was a perfect number that the Romans knew. Other people look at the oculus, the opening in the roof, and said, oh, it was a sundial, or it told different events throughout the year. But basically, the mathematical good point of it is that a sphere with a diameter of 142 feet will fit inside of this structure. Now, the activity that I have in the packet is from Han, but what he does is he finds the volume of that shell. Now, what the Romans did is they built this out of concrete, but to make it light enough, they mixed a different aggregate in the concrete for different sections of the dome. So at the top of the dome, they wanted to make it as light as possible. They used volcanic pumice, which is only 81 pounds per cubic foot. That goes to the third step along the edge. if you see the steps along the outside. Third step to the fifth step, they used terracotta, which was 94 pounds per cubic foot. And then for the rest of that top part of the dome, they used travertine marble as the aggregate with the concrete, and that was 100 pounds per cubic foot. The outside is a sphere with a center. The inside is a sphere with a different center. Now, Hahn wants you to find the weight of that shell making the unsupported dome. But he doesn't give you any information. He basically says, find the volume. It's a volume of revolution. He goes through the calculus. And then he just says, okay, the lightest material was 81 pounds per cubic foot. The heaviest was 100 pounds per cubic foot. So the weight of the dome is anywhere from here to here. Well, that range is about 400 or 4 million pounds. So the activity just asks them to find the volume. If I can ever get a good scale drawing of this thing to figure out where that third step of the exterior ends up or where the fifth step ends up, then it would make a more interesting problem by finding the weight, because they could do 3 separate integrations with different materials and get a better idea of the weight. As far as the oculus goes, so that you have a bound of integration, Hahn says that it is 24 feet across. Other places I've read say it's 300 or 30 feet across. So, you decide what you want to use in the activity, whatever you feel would be most appropriate. Another dome is the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. Now, this was completed in 692. It is not a mosque, it is a Muslim shrine, and it's centered around something called the foundation stone. Now, the foundation stone has a lot of tradition behind it for both Jews and Muslims. If you know your Old Testament, Isaac being sacrificed by Abraham, supposedly on the rock. Muslims believed Muhammad ascended into heaven from the rock. So there's a lot of history behind it. But what the activity does is it uses polar coordinates. So we start with a circle of radius 47 feet, and everything is based on that. So you start with 2 squares, one inscribed in the circle with diagonals, the axes, the X and Y axes, and a second square inscribed in the circle, 45 degrees. So it's parallel to the X and Y axes. The 8 points where those 2 squares intersect create the points for the pillars that support the roof of the shrine. Through those 8 points, you draw 2 sets of parallel lines. And those parallel lines cross in 4 points. And those 4 points define the main pillars around that support the dome around the foundation stone. So the activity asks students to use polar coordinates to give you the coordinates of all of those pillars. The 8 supporting the roof and the 4 supporting the dome. It's really a relatively simple problem because everything is in polar coordinates. So the first pillar is at 22.5 degrees and the next one is 45 degrees later and 45 degrees later. The 4 pillars are at 45, 135, 225, and 315. So everything is balanced. Once you figure out the R value for the outside pillars, it's the same R value for all the points, the same thing for the inside ones. If you wanted to, you could add them or ask them to find the vertices of the octagon. Again, that's a relatively simple thing, 22.5 degrees. And it's inscribed in the circle, so the distance is 47 feet. But it gives them an opportunity to see the beauty of polar coordinates in some structure that is based on it. All right, now those are the 11 activities that I have ready for you. But the fun of it is going to be, can you develop some of your own? So here are some ideas. This is the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, Turkey. It started off as a church, then it became a mosque, and now it became a museum. It also has a dome. But there has been so much reconstruction and issues with the dome that it's no longer a perfect sphere, but we'll go with it. Along with the Han application about the volume of the Pantheon, he does the volume of this dome as well. And for some reason, he chooses to use calculus, and I don't understand why, because basically it's two spheres with a common center. He even, if you look at the drawing, he gets rid of that little lip on the edge, so it's not even that complicated. He makes them two spheres, and he does calculus, when all you need is the volume of the two spheres, and you subtract. And it's the same structure throughout, so he does weight, but it's just multiplying by the constant. So there are lots of other things that you could do more interesting with this, I think, than with that. If you're into domes, another one you might consider is the Dome of St. Paul's in London. It is circular, but the interesting part about it is that it's really three domes. The interior dome is a catenary, but above that is a conical dome, and then above that is another dome based on a catenary. So the cone in the middle supports both the interior dome and the exterior dome. So you might do something with volumes again, get the equation of the catenary based on the dimensions of the domes. Who knows, surface area, volume, there are lots of different applications for it. If you want to take something that they might be more familiar with, here's the Sydney Opera House. That sketch was created by Jorn Ortson in 1956. He entered a competition to design the Opera House. The problem was he didn't bother passing it by an engineer, and neither did the committee. They just liked the design. So he got the commission in 1957. They started building in 1959 with the base, the foundation and the base. And it wasn't until 1962 that he figured out how to do the sails. His original concept was to do poured concrete without any type of internal support. But because these things had to span a large area, he couldn't get the concrete to work. So he was stuck. He tried parabuloids, he tried ellipsoids. The problem with those is that the curvature of the shape changes at different parts of the shape, so that if you were going to do support for each shape, you'd have to customize every single support beam based on the curvature at that point. So what he did is he came up with what he called a spherical solution in 1962. The whole construction, this is a monument outside of the Opera House, showing you that it is based on a sphere. But what he's done is he's taken a sphere with a radius of 246 feet and taken sections of the sphere to create the different sails of the Opera House. Now, I'm not sure, I've never been able to come up with a good math problem for my classes. There was nothing there that I could zero in on. But you can see what happens on the inside. All of those ribs come together and meet at the one point and sort of fan out to form the base of the sail. Now, if you can't do anything with the ribs or the construction of the Opera House, maybe you can find an application with the tiles on the roof. Now, if you look at the tiles from a distance, they look to be all the same color, but they're really not. They're two different shades, a white and a cream. But the shapes of the tile patterns are based on the ribs. So everything fans out from that common point at the base. And as you go further up the sail, the spacing increases, so the pattern of the tiles will also have to change. There are over 1 million tiles, 1,056,000 tiles in this thing. So maybe you could do an activity based on the pattern or how the pattern changes as you go up higher into the sail. Those are just suggestions. Now, one of the most recent things I've done is I traveled to Europe back in 2018, and I really got fascinated by La Sagrada Familia. We're back to Barcelona now. Right? Construction on this thing started in 1883. The original architect lasted a year. And then about a year after it started, they passed everything over to Antoni Gaudí. Gaudí died in 1926. When Gaudí died, the only part of this building that was finished, well, it wasn't even finished, most of it was finished, was the side that you are looking at, which is called the Nativity facade of the church. So there are a lot of different math applications. As I was touring the church, I kept saying, oh, this would make a great application. This would make a great application. So I'm going to go through some of the features of the church, and maybe you can see some of the applications that you might want to draw from. If nothing else, you could use it as models of shapes that you talk about, hyperboloids, paraboloids, hyperbolic paraboloids. When I was doing when I taught those topics, I would talk about nuclear power station cooling towers. I would bring in Pringle potato chips for the hyperbolic paraboloid. But some of the things I'm going to show you are really much more impressive. Now, before we get to the church, let me show you the school that Gaudí built next to the church. Now, the school was built in 1909. It was built for the children of the workers on the church. And when I saw this, I thought that roof would make a great trig problem. The way it undulates, the phase shift for the opposite side, even on the interior shot, you can see the beams in that wave pattern. So there's got to be some activity there. Now, the church was built in 1909, but during the Spanish Civil War in the 1930s, it was destroyed. But they rebuilt it as a location or a museum type structure on the church grounds. So I'll show it to you in a minute. All right, now getting back to the church for other ideas, the church has basically 3 sides to it. This is the Nativity facade, which is very focused on nature. It was built and completed in 1930, so it took them a long time to get there. The other facade is the Passion facade, and it's very angular, very modern. Now, the third front or facade is actually the front of the church. Right now, it is 8% done. None of this is there. This year, they started doing the basements. There are 2 basements to this front. The goal, they're trying to get the church done, architecturally complete by 2026, 100 years after Gaudí's death. So they've got the 2 facades, Nativity and Passion, done. They're going to work on this one, and they've got the central towers just about done. In the Glory facade, it's supposed to look like this. This is a photo of Gaudí's model for the facade. Those shapes in front are hyperboloids. The towers themselves are paraboloids. Here's a sketch of it, and I'm not sure if it's going to be all colored in like that sketch or not, but it could be. All right. As I said, Gaudí died in 1926. This is how much of the church was built when he died. That's it. The apse, that section over to the left with the spires, was built first. And then he spent the rest of his time trying to complete this nativity facade. And this is what he had when he died. This is looking from the inside of the church out. So you don't see the outside of the facade here. But Gaudi died in 1926, right before the Spanish Civil War, which happened in the 1930s. And Barcelona changed governments during the Spanish Civil War between the government and the anarchists and communists back and forth. And at one point, they attacked the church, went to the workshop where Gaudi had all the models for the different features of the church and all of his plans. They burned the plans, they destroyed the models. So after the Spanish Civil War, after World War II, they were trying to decide what to do with this thing. And some people said, just leave it like this, unfinished, as a monument to Gaudi. And who knew what he wanted, because all the plans were destroyed. But because he used mathematics, things weren't lost. In the museum under the church, they've reconstructed some of his models. So if you look at this picture, the dark stone are the fragments that they recovered from the workshop. The lighter stone is what the reconstruction was. So just because they were able to figure out the mathematical shape, surface that they were dealing with, they were able to reconstruct it. There, you'll see a lot of hyperboloids when we get into the church itself, but these were the pieces that were found in the workshop. But again, they were able to reconstruct. Here's another one. Again, the darker stone are the fragments that were recovered. The lighter stone is the reconstruction. Now, each one of those little circles are hyperboloids. So Gaudi, without a computer, was able to create structures where hyperboloids, 7 different hyperboloids in one of those windows, all blended in together. And you can see it in some of the building as we look at it. All right, now what type of math activities might you want to choose? Let's start with the magic square. You can tell from the sculpture that this is the Passion facade. So there is a magic square. Well, it's actually a pseudo magic square. In a magic square, you're supposed to be able to add each row, each column, and each diagonal and come up with the same total. If you do that with this, everything adds up to 33. Traditionally, that was the age of Christ when he was crucified. So this is the Passion facade. But it's not a true magic square. You can't have a magic square that adds up to 33. Not possible. So what the architect did is replace the 12 and the 16 with a second 10 and a second 4. And now every row, every column, and every diagonal will add up to 33. But there's more to this than just a basic magic square. In the museum for the church, they have this display, which shows you all the different ways to add up to 33. If you're doing a basic math class, or you're teaching a class for elementary educators, maybe you ask them to take this and try to find the patterns that will add up to 33. The rows, the columns, the diagonals, sure. But then 2 on each side, 2 top and bottom, the 4 corners. If you go down to the bottom left, you see that cross-shaped figure. If you move every one of those squares over 1 space to the right, you also have another pattern that adds up to 33. So you might do something with this, right? Within the church itself, there are so many different things that you can use. What I found amusing is I went to the newsletter for this church, and I had a search function. So you can type in parabuloid, and it will come up with a half a dozen or more articles based on parabuloids. That's how much math is involved in this thing. Here's an interior shot. Those are all hyperboloids on the ceiling of the interior of the church. There are steeples, bell towers. They are all paraboloids. The stairways on the inside all look like this. So every place you look, there is some math involved in the problem. Right? Let's look at the towers. Now there are going to be 12 towers to the apostles. There are 4 on each of the 3 facades. So 8 of those towers are up. There will be 4 more apostle towers when they finish the glory facade. Around the center, in the center is a tower to Jesus. Behind that is a tower to Mary. It has a star on the top. And around that you have 4 towers, 1 for each of the evangelists, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. This is a shot from above. At the bottom is the Passion facade. At the top is the Nativity facade. Bottom right-hand corner, you can see the school building. You can see the towers. The central tower is the tower to Jesus. Behind that is the Tower of Mary. Around the Tower of Jesus are the 4 evangelists. Now, in 2026, they hope to have the architectural construction done, but they might not be finished with completing Gaudi's plan. And you can see why if you look to the right. Across the road from the church, you see those buildings? Gaudi's plan has a 2-block ramp leading to the front of the church. So the people of Barcelona would have to tear down 2 blocks of buildings in order to make a ramp leading to the church that would go over that road. So who knows if that's going to happen. All right, let's look at the 4 towers for the evangelists. You start off with paraboloids for the base of the tower. The paraboloid ends and it turns into a hyperboloid. So if you look at the 4 pictures or the pictures on the left, the parts with the letters on them are hyperboloids. The hyperboloids will end in the icosahedron, and there will be lights in the holes in the icosahedron. And then you get to the pinnacle, 1 for each of the figures. There is the 1 for each of the apostles, Mark, Luke, Matthew, and John. Even those figures have hyperboloids or sections of hyperboloids as the wings. So wherever you look in this tower, you will see some mathematical symbol. Now, the 4 evangelists have bridges that go to the Tower of Jesus, and they are hyperboloids with an elliptical shape. This is a drawing of that bridge. So the base is the hyperboloid. The finished hyperboloid is finished on top with those cables, so nobody's going to be jumping off the bridges from tower to tower. You can see the towers going into the construction phase. And this is a shot of the Jesus Tower with the 4 openings to the bridges going to the Evangelist Towers. Now, this is done with a different type of lens, but those are equally spaced around the tower. And this is the opening. So you can see the ellipsoid shape, ellipse shape from the hyperboloid bridge. If you look at the Tower of Mary, again, you have the paraboloid on the outside. And the main feature on the inside is a hyperboloid. So instead of your nuclear power cooling tower, consider this, artistically pleasing, if nothing else. Here it is under construction. And the idea is that this is what it's going to look like when it's done. This is a computer-generated drawing. But the hyperboloid is in place. With all the white tiles, it will reflect the light. So the light comes in through the openings in the tower itself. It's reflected off the white tiles and gets reflected down into the hyperboloid. And this is the effect that you have inside the church. So instead of your cooling tower, you could try something that brings the light down. Quite impressive. Now for the Jesus Tower, again, you have the paraboloid on the outside. This is in this sketch, you can see the hyperboloid for the Mary Tower. You have the Jesus Tower. Inside the Jesus Tower, you can see a hyperboloid. I'll show you a better picture of that in a minute. But that shaded section, expanded, looks like this. Can you see the hyperboloids in this? There's one right in the center. There are two on each side of that. And then there are some further out from that. This is what it looks like during construction. So that big opening in the center is that central hyperboloid. The ones around it are the hyperboloids around this shape. The rebar are the columns. And this is what it looks like right now. It's under construction. Again, all those openings above are hyperboloids that you can see. If we look at the tower itself, again, paraboloid, hyperboloid on the inside. In the hyperboloid, you're going to have a staircase and an elevator. The central part of that hyperboloid is a see-through elevator shaft, and the hyperboloid has steps around the edge, and the steps are connected to the hyperboloid itself. So as you climb up, you are away from the elevator. As you reach the narrowest part of the hyperboloid, you're next to the elevator, and as you climb higher, you're further away from the elevator. So if you're looking for an example of a hyperboloid, I mean, this place has tons of them. Now this is a shot of the inside of the church. So at the bottom of the picture, you can see the light from the Mary Tower. The blue stained glass on the right is the Nativity facade. The red stained glass on the left is the Passion facade. The circle in the center is the hyperboloid in the Jesus Tower. Around it, you have circles that are the hyperboloids around that tower. All those openings in the ceiling are hyperboloids. The four columns that look purple have those figures at the top. They are for the Evangelists Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Those glass shapes are all ellipsoids. So everything in this thing has a mathematical application. And I'm not sure how to make it into a math problem, but maybe one of you can come up with some ideas. All right, now the resources in the handout are a lot longer than this. These are just a few of them. So there's the Mathematical Excursions book by Hahn. There's the link to the Batchgeo if you're looking for the latitude stuff. The Library of Congress. If you go to that website, that link, you'll get to all the sketches. I'm amazed at how much is public material. You can get the entire layout of the White House. So if you want to do something with ellipses, there are two oval-shaped rooms in the White House, the blue room and the yellow room. I don't know if they're ovals or if they're ellipses. You could do something with that because the dimensions are part of that. The information on the 4 different ways of the construction, there's a link there. And if you want information about the Sydney Opera House website, go there and there's a section on history with some fantastic photos and goes through the entire spherical solution to his problem. There are lots of other resources on the handout that you were sent. If you want Word documents for the applications or the PDF documents, we're going to post them on the AMATIC website, but you can also get the PDF documents on the AMATIC website, but you can also get them from my Dropbox folder as well if you are interested. Just send me an email and I will send you access to the Dropbox. All right, Pat, it's back to you.
All right, well, Jim, thank you for this. those in attendance, if we want to give Jim a virtual round of applause with a comment over in the chat area. If you have any questions, you can type them into the chat. Jim, you can probably hit the chat now and see the kudos that are coming in.
Okay, there you go.
There were only 2 questions that came up during one. I think there was a typo on one slide. It was Quadrarc. I think he left off the second R. And then we had a question about the handouts Jim was referring to. We tried to send out the full file before, but it was too big to go through my email. So we'll get that to George, and he'll post that on Amatic. Once all those materials, along with the recording of this webinar, are ready and posted, I'll email those who registered, so you can get access to to all the files that Jim was mentioning, or you have his email address if you want to request more information. Let me kind of wrap this up with, where was I? Okay, just a few final comments here. Thank you for participating. If you are not a member and wish to join, we have a link, and always looking for new members. We do have a presence on Facebook, the Amatic Facebook page, a lot of good information there. Other professional development opportunities, the National Conference this year in November will be in Spokane. We do have traveling workshops as well as other webinars. And I'm going to take a moment to make this plug. I mentioned it to somebody earlier. We're always looking for clever ideas, for good ideas, or ideas for webinars. I think a lot of times as faculty, we maybe undervalue the good ideas and the things we're using in class. So if you've got something interesting to share and you're not able to travel to an Amatic conference, contact me for information about doing a webinar. We'll try to get the the materials posted within the next week or 2. I will admit that our Chimatic conference is this coming weekend, so it might be just a hair longer than usual. And then here is the link or the QR code to evaluate the webinar. If you would take a minute to do that. If you need a certificate of attendance, there's a question in the evaluation to give your contact information. And again, I'll try to get those out in the next week or so. Are there any other questions for either myself or Jim, or comments? Let me see. I'll put this back up in a minute. I'll put the link in the chat box, but it's hard to see the chat when that's up. Jim, wonderful job. I love the Barcelona Olympic arrow. I'm gonna throw that into the class, and is it an ellipse or not? That'll work really well in one of my classes. So took some good notes during this. Any other questions? I see a lot of greats and thank yous, Jim. I don't see any questions. Right. Looks like most everybody's still here.
Okay.
Somebody said they like the longitude activity. Okay, Penny, you've got see that you have to go to class. If you have questions, you can either contact me or Jim, and we'll be happy to answer those questions. Jim, any last words?
Nope, I'm good.
All right. Well, once again, thank you all for attending, and we will try to get this material posted as soon as possible. Have a great day, and hope you can use some of this in your classrooms.
All right. Thank you all.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody. Jim, well done. We ended up at, I think at peak time, we had 22 attendees. So,
all right.
And then we'll share this information and.
Okay, and I will see.
Good stuff. That book sounds like something I'd be interested in. So.
Yeah, but hey, the trick is look for a used copy.
Yeah.
Because I found one and it was so much cheaper.
All right, I will put that on my wish list. Okay, well, I will go ahead and
okay.
You don't have any more, we'll end the meeting and download the recording.
Take care.
All right, thanks.
Bye.
Let's see, Coral, let me stop the recording first.